All right, this is Marna Weston with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program on August 12th, 2021, assisted with an outstanding videographer, Deborah Hendricks. She's here, and we're interviewing today Captain David Bridges, a renowned aviator, African-American mentor, inspirer of young people, and has a very colorful and exciting history. Captain Bridges, thank you very much for coming into Pugh Hall today and doing this interview.
My pleasure to be here. So, just happy to be here, happy to share my story. So there might be some young person out there somewhere that has the same dream that I have.
I'm sure that everyone will be inspired. Would you mind, just to start out, what is that dream that you had?
The dream that I had, it all started at the age of 7. Mm-hmm. I used to, we lived in Orange at the time. We were growing up in Orange. We lived at 223 Park Place in Orange.
And Orange is
New Jersey.
New Jersey, okay.
Right,
Orange,
I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
And at the time, we're talking the late 60s, early 70s, we lived in the one apartment building on our street. Everybody else had a house. We lived in this apartment building. Well, we had access to the roof. And on Saturdays, there was an old DC-3. It was red and white with black stripes. And it used to fly over real low. We'd go up every Saturday up on the roof and watch this thing fly. And my father, what he would do, he'd wake us up early on Saturday mornings. And how we would do, he would drive us over to JFK, over to Kennedy Airport, and we'd watch the international flights come in. Then we'd drive over to LaGuardia and go to the seaplane base, watch the seaplanes take off and land. Then we go to Newark and end up in Newark and watch airplanes in Newark. And then we go to lunch, right? And then by the time we got home, that DC-3 would be flying over. And we go up on the roof and watch that. And then we go and watch TV, and our Saturday morning lineup, after we watched airplanes, we would watch 12 O'Clock High, Whirlybirds, and GI Combat was what we watched with our dad. So our dad was real instrumental in that. Well, in 1969, the movie Battle of Britain came out, and he took my older brother and myself to go see the Battle of Britain. And that's where, after watching the movie, that's where the love of airplanes came in. So after the movie, it was like, I was like 6.5, maybe 7 years old. And what happened, my father had his own radio show. And one of the production directors for his show was a private pilot. So that particular year, our family reunion was every Mother's Day weekend. Well, this particular Mother's Day weekend, he got his coworker to fly us down to Virginia because he was a private pilot. And at the end of the flight, when we got back to Jersey, that's when I decided I'm going to fly airplanes for a living.
That's wonderful.
That's what I'm going to do.
So your dad was in radio, but because he had a friend in aviation, you ended up having unique access.
Right.
How was it that your dad was so inspirational in taking you, from JFK to LaGuardia and then to Newark? How did that practice start?
Well, my brother's 11 years older than me. So he was the one that was just crazy about airplanes, and I used to watch him build airplane models and stuff like that. And as it turns out, there was a little airport called East Hanover where we used to go, sometimes on Saturdays. And my dad used to cut grass at that airport, right, as a side job. Well, the cool part about it was I was fascinated with the garbage truck at the time, right? Wanted to be a garbage man, right? Because the garbage truck for me was just the coolest piece of equipment because it crushed stuff up. It made a lot of noise. Mm-hmm. And you could hang on the side of it while it was moving, right?
Sure.
I was a 6-year-old kid, right? Mm-hmm. So my brother, while my dad was cutting grass, right? My brother's over there eyeballing airplanes. Right here was where they parked the garbage trucks. Mm. So I'd go over there and talk to the guys that worked on the garbage trucks. Well, it wasn't until I took that first flight that I realized, you know what? Flying is better.
But if a garbage truck could have had wings.
If a garbage truck would have had ballot of fluid, right?
Were you always oriented mechanically? I mean, it must take incredible mechanical proficiency in order to be an aviator. How did you get your training, and what was your interest?
Yeah, I was always the kid that tinkered with stuff, right? And as a result of my older brother, I got into building the airplane models. The started out with the plastic models, and then the balsa wood models, and as I built more models, the details and getting more complex with it. And as I got older, I started, getting into my father's stuff, right? Making him angry. Boys, stay out of my tools. Just stay out of my tools. Because I was always tinkering with something around the house. Oh, mom says the toaster doesn't work. So me and my brother, let's see if we can fix it, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just, and we tinker with it. And finally it's like, hey, Mom, we got the toaster to work, right? We didn't know what we were doing. We were just like, this is logical. This is what's logical. This makes sense. Let's do this, right? Sparks flying, lights go out. We reset the circuit breakers. Okay, that was a bad move. Let's try this, right? And we get the toaster to work, right? Or, the fan that was over my mom's stove that sucked the smoke out, right? It stopped working. So I pulled it out. And I was like, first of all, it's covered in grease. So let's clean this up. Let's clean that up. Oh, look, there's some wires loose. So I was always tinkering with stuff. So by the time I got to middle school, they did offer classes like electricity and electronics, of course, shop, right? So those were, classes I took.
So you're a strong proponent of vocational education as well.
Yes, very much so. Because think about it. When you take 10 kids, right? Not all 10 of these kids are, out of these 10, somebody's going to college. That's great. Woo-hoo. But not all 10 of these kids are cut out for college, right? Now let's look at college, right? You go through college, you do all this stuff, you do these things, and depending on what you study, you might not find work. Versus you do a vocation, now you learning the skills that pay the bills. Plumbing, electricity, carpentry, stuff that we need to know, stuff you need every day.
This was what makes your story so fascinating to me. Not only that you are so invested in young people and mentoring them, but that you have these incredible technical skills that you've developed. You didn't graduate from high school. You make a six-figure salary. I mean, that's the American dream. Could you talk a little? Talk about that.
Yeah, I was like, I wasn't a bad student, but my problem was I was disinterested, so to speak. I was disinterested, and the problem was I wasn't challenged. So I got bored. I basically got bored with school. So I clowned. Now, I started playing drums at the age of 9. So I was in the band. So most of my friends were in the band. And when you were a drummer, right, we all hung out together. We were drummers, so we hung out together. So the drummers, man, we go here, we go clown and this and that and the other thing. Well, right around age 13, right, how it worked was when you went to school, you would show up for homeroom. Well, of course, homeroom was the band room because we were in the band. So our band room was the homeroom. Well, our music teacher, he would take roll. And once he took roll, you were counted as being in school for the whole day, okay? So what I did at the age of 13, I would go to school, get counted, leave school about 9:30, go up to Springdale Avenue, catch the bus up the main street, get on the train, take the train to Morristown, work the 3 miles from the train station to the airport. Go to the airport, I'd cut about $40 worth of grass, wash 2 or 3 airplanes, I'd go fly.
So washing airplanes and doing maintenance at the airfield gave you access to an industry that has shaped your life.
There it is, right? And this was at 13. Well, I went about it the wrong way because here I am, I'm cutting class, I'm playing hooky from school. So what happened was by the time it's time for me to graduate high school, I had missed so much time from school. They were like calling my parents like, here it is, you know, the end of summer. I'm getting ready to start my senior year of high school. And it was like first day of school. They're like parent-teacher conference. My mom was like, what have you done now? The school hasn't even started yet. And it was like first day of school. They're already telling her, he's not graduating in June. Not gonna happen, right? Doesn't have enough credits. So what wound up happening was 11 days after my 17th birthday, I was 10 years old when I was walking to school and I saw a big billboard and it had U.S. Marine on it, right? And because I had no interest in the military, didn't think twice about the military, but I was walking to school and I saw a big billboard with U.S. Marine on it. And I started researching the Marine Corps from the age of 10 and found out, oh man, the Marines have airplanes. They have an aviation program. So I think at like age 15,
You knew you'd be a Marine aviator?
I'm writing to Washington, D.C., right, to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, right, getting information about the Marines and Marine aviation, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a Marine aviator now. Well, because I had cut up in school so bad, going to college wasn't an option. So 11 days after my 17th birthday, I enlisted in the U.S. Marines on the delayed entry program. So I wound up not graduating with my class, and I wound up going to Montclair High School for summer school to get my diploma in August, right? And I had to take math and English to make up the credits. So I took the math and English courses to make up the credits. And in October of 1981 was when I left. I left home, I went to boot camp, and 8 January 1982 was when I graduated boot camp.
Oh my gosh. Now, I remember the Marines had that incident that happened in Beirut not long after that.
Yeah, so my mom was kind of like, you know, on the edge of her seat because, you know, that whole Beirut thing had just taken place. And here I am, 1981, 11 days after my birthday, like, I do, so help me God, right? And she's just like, oh my goodness. Plus they had to, I'm 17, right? So they had to sign the paperwork,
That's
right?
true.
And so, you know, they knew that's what I wanted, right? So what happened was I came home for 10 days of leave, wound up going to Memphis for my A school, for my A training. And I trained as an aircraft mechanic. And 4 months later, graduated at the top of my class from A school. And now here I am, a basically trained aircraft mechanic. Went to Beaufort, South Carolina, which was my permanent duty station. Checked into my squadron, and that's where I learned how to work on F-4s as a mechanic. And started working on F-4s and quickly rose through the ranks. And while I'm doing that, I'm flying on the weekends.
Now, what's special about the F-4 aircraft that you obviously gained proficiency in it, but you said it with a lot of joy in your voice, so I was just curious, what is it about an F-4 that you really enjoyed?
It was just a cool airplane. It was just a really cool airplane. So it was like once you, and the thing with the military is, anybody, the funny thing is, you know, you going through school, you say, well, I wanted to work on helicopters. That's what I wanted. I wanted to work on helicopters. And I had this affinity for the CH-53. I wanted to work on the CH-53.
Now, what kind of aircraft is that?
Now, the CH-53 was the Marine Corps' biggest troop transport helicopter, troop and cargo transport.
Is that the double?
No, that's the 46, which we no longer have.
Okay.
Marine Corps no longer has. It was replaced by the V-22 Osprey.
Okay.
But the CH-53 is the biggest in the Marine Corps inventory. So that was the one I was interested in. Because I had saw one, I was 15 years old, and I had gone to an air show, and I saw one up close. And I was like, ooh.
Now, what is it like compared to the one, the Marine one that picks up the president on the South Lawn at the White House?
Oh yeah, the old Sikorsky, right, which is going to be phased out fairly soon. The old Sikorsky, that was a Navy helicopter. That particular helicopter was the one they used to pick up the astronauts when they would splash down after the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions. That was the type of helicopter that they used to pick up the astronauts with, right? That particular helicopter they used for search and rescue, anti-submarine warfare, mine detection, stuff like that. And then they got that particular model, and they call them presidential white tops, right? They use them for VIP transport. So that's the difference between, it's smaller. It's somewhat smaller than the CH-53, right? So
anybody listening to this interview who's an aficionado of aircraft will be excited. You've mentioned so many different models. I want to go back to where you talked about the F-4 and you were working on them. You said then you were flying. What were you flying at that time after you were working with the F-4s?
That's when I was, I was just working on my private pilot certificate, right? So I'm flying Cessnas and stuff like that. The smaller Pipers like the Tomahawk, the Warrior, the Archers, right? The Cessna, the 152, the 172. So, as I could afford to do it, I'd go do it.
Do you have a favorite type of private plane, or were you just flying what you could for certification?
Yeah, just what I could for certification, as, when time permitted, because as a young Marine, I was constantly deploying. So I'd fly some, but then I'd have to deploy for 6 weeks. I'd come back, fly some, then I'd have to go overseas for 6 months. Come back, I might have to deploy here for 3 weeks. So I was constantly on the move.
Can you talk about one of those deployments? I mean, do you mean you were deployed stateside in some job or internationally?
I deployed to Japan.
Okay,
right?
where did you go there?
We went to Iwakuni, right? We went to Iwakuni, Japan, and I did 2 of those overseas tours. And in that 6-month tour, we did a 3-week tour in Korea. And then on my first tour we did, out of that 6 months, we did 3 months, we did 3 weeks in Korea, and then 3 months in the Philippines. And then we went back stateside. On the stateside tours, we would go to places like Oceana, Virginia, Yuma, Arizona, Cherry Point, North Carolina, right, for smaller jets or smaller detachments.
Camp David, Hawaii, California?
We passed through Hawaii on our way to Japan.
Okay.
Coming back from Japan, we passed through Hawaii on our way back to South Carolina. So you pass through places like that.
Did you ever go to Subic or Clark when you were in the Philippines?
I was at Subic.
Subic? Okay.
I was at Subic, and funny thing happened while at my second rotation. My older brother was at Clark, working on F-4s at the same time that I was at Subic working on F-4s. So that was kind of ironic, because we did cross paths while we were there. So
that's one. And so you got to spend some time with each other while you were both enlisted.
Yeah, we did.
Did your brother also make a career in the military?
He did. He originally did 4 years in the Army. His plan was to go in the Army, become a warrant officer and fly helicopters, but that didn't happen. So after four years in the Army, he transferred over to the Air Force and made a 24-year career out of the Air Force.
Now, the time period that he was in the military and corresponding with you, what were the times and the major issues going on militarily for the United States during your time in service? My time, you had Beirut, Lebanon, and then we had the first Gulf War. Okay, Grenada?
Grenada was as well, but we didn't participate in that. We didn't participate in that, but we had, again, Beirut, Lebanon, and the first Gulf War.
Now, was that Desert Shield or Desert Storm?
Both.
Desert Storm, okay.
Well, both Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And then shortly after that, I left. I did approximately 13 years. I did 8 active, right, and the rest was reserve time. And then I got out. I left, and what I did, I started driving tractor trailers, right? And what I did was I drove tractor trailers, and I would go to school at night, right? I would go to school. I went to Spartan School of Aeronautics in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and basically finished up all the flying and got my degree from Spartan School of Aeronautics. Well, while in Spartan School of Aeronautics, what I was doing is I was driving a dry bulk cement tanker, 15 hours a night, 5.5 nights a week, right, while I went to school. So what I would do, I would go and pick up dry powdered cement, take it to all the different cement plants around Oklahoma and Arkansas, Bentonville, Fayetteville, Tulsa, Owasso, all around Tulsa, all around Oklahoma. Sometimes I go into Kansas, and I would pump the cement into the silos. So when the cement mixers cranked up in the morning, right, that's where the cement came in. That's where the cement came from that they put in the cement mixers to go pour cement for these different jobs.
Okay.
I would pump that stuff in the middle of the night, and the cement mixers would just run it around during the day and just make, they'd pour your foundation for your house, right? Or they'd pour, the bed for the road, right? That's where the cement came from. I would pick it up somewhere, right, and deliver it all around.
Okay, so you drove a cement mixer, you drove a tractor trailer, you are a mechanic for F4s, you flew Cessnas, you loved garbage trucks and wanted one with wings. How did this part of your career where you were driving and pouring cement lead you to become the commercial aviator that you became?
Well, what I was doing while driving the truck, I would take the truck and I would just go straight to school with it, right? Once I got done with my last load, it was time for me to go to school. So I'd go straight to school, take a quick nap in the truck, right? Set the clock, get up, go in school, run in the bathroom, wash some of the cement dust off real quick, right? Go to ground school. So we had 5 hours of ground school, and you'd fly for 5 hours. So I'd go 5 hours of ground school, 5 hours of flying, take a quick nap in the truck, go pick up some loads, right? So,
how long was this going on? Was this like a year?
It was the whole time I was in school. It was like 3.5 years.
3.5 years? Wow.
Yeah, it was the whole time I was in school. So I'm doing this, and the weekends was where I would just decompress, right? And I'm using the money from trucking to pay for college, because trucking paid me enough to where I could keep a roof over my head, I could keep food in my belly, and I could pay my tuition. Well, it just so happened that the guy that I worked for, I didn't know it, but the guy that I worked for happened to be a pilot. Well, what happened was my car broke down. So I'm walking to work, right? And so what happened, my dispatcher found out I was walking to work. So he's like, oh, I'm gonna go pick up Bridges. He's probably walking. I'll go pick him up halfway and bring him to work. So the guy is like, well, who is this kid? And they're like, oh, you don't know? He's the kid, man. He drives your truck, man, and he goes to school and this and that and the other thing. So unbeknownst to me, when he found out I was going to Spartan School of Aeronautics, taking the professional pilot course, what he does, he goes up to the school and starts asking, how's the kid doing in school? They open up the transcripts. And he's looking at the transcripts and he's going, holy smokes, anybody that can drive my truck the way he does and get grades like this doesn't need to drive my truck. He's not a truck driver. He's just not. And so what he did was, it turns out he was the third richest man in Oklahoma. He made a few phone calls. So it was one of those periods where I had run out of money. So I was able to go to the ground schools and take the classes, but I couldn't fly. They called it a Red X list. You were on the Red X list until you got a certain amount of money, then you could fly, and you fly that off. I'm on the Red X list at the time. So I'm about to go to work. I'm about to get in the truck and go. And the lady from the financial aid office says, hey, you need to go across town and pick up your check. And I said, I don't have a check come due yet. It's going to be like another 90 days or so before I have a check come in. And she says, oh no, you have a check across town. So, because there were like 3 campuses to this school. So I drive across town and walk in, and this lady hands me this check, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, wait a minute, what? She said, oh yeah, that's the balance of your tuition. Your tuition is paid in full. It's paid off. And I'm going, what? And she's like, oh yeah. So I take it, I turn it in, and they said, okay, you're good to go. Well, when I graduated, right, and I got my first job offer, which was in Salt Lake City, Utah, to teach. I get my first job offer. I have to do an exit interview at Mid-Continent Concrete, right, with the owner of the company. So I do the exit interview, and that's when he told me that he was the one that got me the grant. It was an actual grant, so I never had to pay it back. Mm-hmm. He got me the grant that put me right over the hump in order to graduate.
What was the conversation that you all had like at that moment?
And he said, he asked me, he says, let me ask you a question. He says, if it wasn't for aviation, he said, what do you think about my company? I said, if it wasn't for airplanes and aviation, I said, this would be my home. You know, I said, because, you know, while I was here, I was taken care of. You know, I made enough money to take care of me. Mm-hmm. And I made enough money to where I could help pay my tuition. So, you know, it was one of those places where it was like, one, I felt like part of the family. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, once they found out that I was going to school, there were times where they'd be like, you know what, Dave, you got an exam tomorrow. So you know what, don't come in Wednesday and Thursday. Prepare for your exam. Come back in on Monday.
That's wonderful.
That's just how they were.
How long did you keep that relationship going?
Oh, I still talk to Mr. Hardesty, because he's always like, how are you doing in your career? How's it going? So I keep in touch with Mr. Hardesty, because
that's terrific.
He was like, you make sure you keep in touch with me. Let me know how you're doing, blah, blah, blah. So to this day, I still talk to him.
I have a feeling that because of that relationship or something from it, it inspires you to do the work that you do with youth now.
Yes. Could
you talk about that a little?
So once I got established in the aviation field, and I mean really got established, that's when I decided, okay, now it's time to pay that back. It's time to go out and seek those kids that love this profession just as much as I do. And they're not hard to find, because they usually find you, right? And when they do, right, it's like, all right, kid, we're going to put you into play. We're going to get you out here. We're going to get you out here, and we're going to get you in the industry. So over the years, and how I got, it's funny because how I got started, I actually got started in flight school. And what happened, where I lived, the apartment complex that I lived in was pretty much, it was a combination of, locals from Tulsa that lived in there and students. So it was a mix of students and local people. Well, the young man that lived downstairs, where I lived on the south side of Tulsa. And believe it or not, at that time, there was a big, at the time, Crips and Bloods are starting to show up, right? Okay. What's happening is parents are like, I want to get my child away from this lifestyle. So I'm going to leave Los Angeles and I'm going to move to Oklahoma. Well, when these kids get to Oklahoma, you got these kids from Oklahoma that, realize or recognize who these kids are. And it's like, these kids are going, wow, they're enamored just because I exist. So now we're starting to see, inundation of Bloods and Crips. Where I lived at the time, which is the south side, is Crips. On the north side, it's Bloods. Well, the little fella that lived up underneath me, his uncle was a major Crip, right? So I would come home, sometimes I'd come home from work, I might have enough time to run by, take a shower, grab a bite to eat, and this kid's sitting on the stoop at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what's going on with that? And he's like, well, my uncle, you know who my uncle is, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, here, let's do this. I said, I went to the hardware store, had a key made to my apartment. And I said, I'll put the key under the mat. when you come home, instead of sitting here on the stoop, because we never know when your uncle's going to come, go into the mat, go in my house. I'll have extra towels, soap, this, that, and the other thing, right? You do your homework, make yourself something to eat, get some sleep, right? And, you know, when I come in, I'll check your homework, make sure you're good to go, and, you know, make sure you on that bus to school or I drop you off myself. So I start doing that. Well, I asked him one day, I said, well, what do you want to do with your life? And he says, well, I'm afraid to talk about it because of who my uncle is and how I grew up. He said, because nobody takes me serious. I said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be a corporate lawyer. And I was like, I don't know no corporate lawyers. I said, let me open the phone book. So I opened the phone book and I just picked a lawyer. And I said, hey man, do you know any African-American corporate lawyers? And the guy goes, yeah, I do. Can you put me in touch with this guy? So he puts me in touch with this guy and I said, hey man, I want you to meet this kid, right? I don't know what you can do with him or just, you know, come over, talk to him, blah, 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 blah. So one Saturday he comes over, I introduce him to the kid, they get to talking, and he took the kid under his wing. And in the process of talking, he said, hey man, I know a kid that wants to go for a plane ride. He just loves airplanes, talks about airplanes all the time. So one Saturday, Veneta, Oklahoma was where the world's largest McDonald's is. So they have car parking, bus parking, truck parking, and airplane parking. So I said, yo man, let's fly up to Veneta, get some lunch, and fly back. So he goes, really? Yeah, sure. So sure enough, we fly up to Veneta, we fly back. His eyes are big as saucers. And I'm going, wow, did I look like that? Did I look like that when I took my first plane ride? And so from that point on, I took the kid under my wing and I was like, okay, man, this is where you start. These are the people you need to talk to, right? And so he said, I know some other kids, man, that will be interested in flying. And I said, okay, well, bring them. And, you know, so on the Saturdays when I didn't have anything to do, I'd take this group of kids flying. And we'd go fly and we'd go get lunch and clown around and, you know, we'd fly back. And I graduated, but by this time, these kids are, you know, they're out there like I was now. Now they're back in school, right? They're back on track, right? And they're like, okay, we're going to do what you do, right? So that's how I got started in the whole mentoring program, or how I just got started, you know, mentoring young people in aviation. So by the time I started, you know, gaining traction in my career, you know, now I'm done flight instructing, which didn't pay a lot, right? So I had 2 other jobs while I was flight instructing, right? So because I had to make ends meet. But by the time I got my first real airline job was where I really kicked it into gear. And I started, you know, hey man, look, we're gonna get with this group here, you know, we're gonna go take you and fly you to this place. And, you know, you're interested in this school? All right, we're gonna use my flight benefits, you know, from the airline, and we'll fly from here to here so you can check out the campus, you can see the school, you can meet the recruiters, right? You can talk to the financial aid office versus, you know, doing it on the phone, doing it through mail. We're gonna use my benefits to fly from here to here so you can go and check out the school that you wanna go to.
What is the status of your youth program right now? How many kids do you think you've inspired, or are you currently working with?
Just this past June, with the help of the 100 Black men of Greater Florida and Gainesville, just this past June, we took 63 kids flying right out here at Gainesville Airport.
That's wonderful.
On a Saturday. 63 kids, I think like 30 or 40 of them were from the Reichert House. So, you know, out of that, we've inspired quite a few. And I mean, I've actually had the honor of actually training one of the young men that I mentored at the airline that I work for. I trained him, right? And, you know, he and I flew together. And so here we are from the same neighborhood, from the same high school. It's just that I went through the program. We had this little aviation program in our high school, run by a pastor out of the basement of his church.
What high school was that?
I went to Clifford J. Scott High School in East Orange, New Jersey. And I came out in the 80s, the early 80s. And this kid comes out in the mid to late 90s, right? And here it is, fast forward, 2020, and who applies at our airline and then gets put on my fleet. And they're like, oh, Dave, you're training this kid. And I'm going, really? How cool is that? Awesome. Two kids from the same high school, same neighborhood, same aviation program, and here I am training him, at our airline.
You seem really excited about that.
Oh,
I'd like
I
to take a
was really
quick aside and then come back to you developing your career, because we got to the end with the youth after you were supercharged. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that history of how you as an aviator started. But just a quick answer, what do you think about the expansion down at the Gainesville Airport?
I love it. I love it. That's a good sign that they're expanding the airport. They're building. That means there are big things on the horizon for Gainesville. Plus, if you look around, Gainesville is growing.
Yeah, direct flights to Dallas. Where'd that come from?
Direct flights to Dallas, that was out of the blue.
It was.
Direct flights to Dallas. Gainesville is growing by leaps and bounds, so it's off the chain. So I like that new terminal. That's nice. That is nice. So I can foresee them extending the runways to bring bigger airplanes in.
That would be incredible.
See that. I can see that on the horizon.
So let's go from the big planes of the future to maybe your smaller planes of the past when you first started flying the commercial airlines. What was your first big plane that you flew?
I started out in Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places. Right? If you had told me way back then when I was in high school, Dave, you're going to live in Salt Lake City, Utah. And
That's a nice thing. They come in over the Wasatch Range every time I go to Salt Lake City. It's so beautiful.
I would have been like, you're full of it, right? What, me, Utah? No. But I started as a flight instructor out in Utah. So I started out teaching people, you had folks, they might want to do it as a hobby. Of course, you had the people that wanted to do it as a career. So I started out as a teacher, right? I used to teach people how to fly, right? Take them from 0 hours to their pilot's license, or take them from 0 hours to their commercial pilot certificate, right? And then I wound up teaching at UVSC, which is Utah Valley State College. I started teaching there, which I taught the ground school there, and I administered the FAA written exams, to all the prospective candidates as they came through. I used to administer the sim evaluations for SkyWest Airlines. So people that wanted to go to fly for SkyWest, they would come and do a sim prep with me to get ready for their interview. So I would do those. And I wound up becoming the assistant chief of one of the campuses there in Utah. And then I became the chief flight instructor at that same campus. So I wound up, teaching to running a campus. And then I finally had enough hours to get my first real airline job. So the first technically big airplane or airliner I flew was the Beech 1900. Okay. It had 19 seats, 1 seat short of having a flight attendant. So it had 19 seats. So I had to double as the co-pilot and the flight attendant. So I used to have to give them their brief and how to work the emergency exits and all this stuff. And here's where the mask is going to come from and all that stuff. And then, take my seat up front. And, when it was my turn, I go fly. Right? So the Beech 1900, fully loaded, weighed about 17,000 pounds. Right? Could carry 19 people and 1,000 pounds of bags. Right?
Is that props or jet?
Prop. It was a turboprop.
Turboprop, okay.
And so it had a service ceiling of about 24,000 feet. So that was like my first big real airplane. And I'm like, yeah, I've made it. Woohoo, I'm here. Right? I'm an airline pilot. Wasn't making no money though. Right? But I was just happy. Right?
You're in a regional airline?
Yep. I worked for a little airline called Great Lakes. And at the time, their headquarters was in Spencer, Iowa, right? Never forget it. First time I ever went out to Iowa, right? Spencer, little bitty old town, right? And they had 2 hotels in town, right? I can't remember the name of the other one, but the big one was called The Hotel. And they were like, I said, where am I staying? They're like,
The hotel.
you're staying at the hotel. And I was like, I get that. What's the name? They're going, the hotel. And I'm going, no, what's the name of it? They're going, the hotel. Well, when I get there, it's like, the hotel. And I remember that night before my interview, I decided I'm going to go across the street and get a beer at this bar. And I go across the street, and this guy goes, you got to be one of them pilots for that little airline out there at the airport. And I said, how do you know? He said, because there's only two things you can be here in Spencer. He said, that's a pilot or a pig farmer. He said, you ain't no pig farmer. I know. Right? And I said, yeah, well, you got that right. So, because it was pig farms everywhere. And that was true. It was like in Spencer, Iowa, that was all you could be. Pig farmer.
Pilots or pig farmers?
Or a pilot, right? So, yeah, that's what I do. Right? Yeah, you guys come through here all the time with your little classes and stuff. So that was where I started. I worked at Great Lakes for 10 months. And then I went to Mesa Airlines. Worked for Mesa Airlines, and they were a regional for United Express, Delta, and America West at the time.
Where was their headquarters?
Now, their headquarters was I flew for the Air Midwest side of the house. Their main headquarters was in Phoenix, Arizona.
It sounded like Phoenix.
Right? That was Phoenix, right? But I flew for Air Midwest, which was in Wichita, Kansas. Okay. So I had to go to Wichita, Kansas for training. Well, because I had experience on the Beech 1900, that's where I started. So they put me on the 1900.
And you became a captain?
And I became a captain there. Matter of fact, I was there 8 months, and I became a captain after 8 months. And then I went from the 1900 straight to the left seat of the 50-seat regional jet. And then I started flying the 70-seat regional jets and the 90-seat regional jets at Mesa. So it was like my time in the turboprop spent, and then my time in the jets. And then I got hired by Coletta Air, where I'm working at now. Right? That was the highlight of my career, right? Because it was like, when we used to go to JFK, right? And I used to always see the old classic 747 freighters sitting off in the corner. And I remember telling my co-pilots, I was like, that's me. I'm gonna be flying a crusty old 747 freighter across the North Atlantic Ocean to Europe someplace. And everybody's going, why do you want to do that? And I was like, that's just what I want to do. Sure enough, I get the call Valentine's Day 2007. And they were like, hey, Dave, you just interviewed. How would you like to come to class? We got a class starting March the 5th, 2007. I was like, I'm so there. I'll take it. So I fly out to Michigan, right? And that's where I learned how to fly the 747.
What was your first 747 flight like?
It was awesome, right? Because first of all, I'm from East Orange, New Jersey. Now, remember, I grew up going to Newark, New Jersey to watch airplanes fly. My very first flight right out of training, right? Newark, New Jersey to Liège, Belgium. So I'm just like, ha, ha, ha. Here I am flying a 747 out of my hometown airport, going all the way over to Europe. So it was like, that was the highlight of my career, right? My father's out there taking pictures, right? He's out there like, this is great.
I'm glad you mentioned your dad. Normally we start this with a little biography. I like to take people back to talk about, their parents or grandparents. Who are your mom and dad?
Now, my mom was from Lynchburg, Virginia, and she was, in my younger years, she was a domestic worker, right? Now, she only had an 8th grade education because back then, coming from the South, you were only allowed to go to the 8th grade. And when she got old enough, she took 5, believe it or not. There were 17 on my mother's side. She had 16 siblings, right? So there were 17 of them total. She took 5 of her younger siblings, went up north, and saw to it that they got educated all the way through high school and college. Well, she taught herself, and she eventually became a nurse's aide, right? And my dad, who grew up in New Jersey, he joined the Navy right out of high school, right? Fought in the Korean War. And after the Korean War, right? That's where I got my work ethic from, was from my dad. He gets out of the Navy, right? And he goes to communication school, right? And at night, guess what he did? He drove a truck. He drove a delivery truck at night. And he managed a gas station.
So the path was paved
Right.
before you got to it.
He drove a delivery truck, and he managed a gas station at night. And once he completed communication school, he went to the radio station, right? And what he did, he went down there and says, hey,
Please go ahead.
he says, hey, he says, I need a job. He says, I need a job. And the guy that owned the radio station says, I don't have nothing for you. Come back in a month. He comes back the next day and says, well, you know, things change. You know, you might have got something. I just came to see if you got something.
Okay.
Well, he kept coming back every day. He did that for 14 days. And the guy said, you really want a job, don't you? And my father said, yep, sure do. He said, I'm going to keep coming back every day until you hire me. And he says, well, you're hired. So he started out as a production director. And eventually he wound up, by the time I knew anything, he had had his own radio show for 46 years, right? So he was just that guy, man. He was just like relentless. He wasn't taking no for an answer, and that's where we got it from. We got it from him. It's like, okay, I'm going to be here. I'm not going away until you say, okay, Dave, I'm going to be here, right? Every time you look out that window, I'm going to be down there. How you doing? I know you told me to come back next week, but I'm here.
How about your grandparents? Do you remember much of them?
Yes, on my mother's side, my grandparents, my grandfather was a handyman. He built stuff, right? He built furniture and stuff like that. He did the repairs on everybody's houses in that county. And my grandma, she was that guy. She was that lady. My grandma was that lady that she managed the family. You know, you got 17 children. She kept in line. She kicked them into play, right? So made sure they, got education and stuff like that. Because here they were pretty much one generation removed from slavery. So it was like education was everything, right? And so the older ones, it was like you older ones have to be responsible for educating the younger ones. So that's how they were. So
what about grandparents on the other side?
Now on my father's side, my grandfather, he passed away before I was born. He had leukemia. But my grandma, I knew her, right? And she was different, right? She was that rough and tumble lady from Newark, New Jersey, right? She was it, right? And so she was a character, is what she was. Loved her because she was just different. She was colorful, is how I would describe my grandma. She was colorful.
Any knowledge of their parents, or is it mostly your memories with your grandparents?
From my mother's side is where I knew most. From my father's side, we had limited knowledge, but enough to know, okay, we understood all the way up until, I think I knew about like my grandpa, like Maurice's father. I knew about him, right? But I didn't know about my grandma. I didn't know about her parents. So,
what about your own family?
Now, my family, when I got married, I met my wife on the job.
When did you get married, and what is her name?
Angela. And we met at Coletta Air. She worked at Coletta Air at the time. And we got married in 2013. So I inherited 2 grown daughters, which I love to death. I love them. So I don't refer to them as my stepdaughters. They're my daughters, right? And now I got 6 grandkids, right? So I love that bunch.
Spoiling them.
Yes, yes, I love that bunch because they're coming into the age where we have 2 preteens, 1 teenager, right? And then we got the little ones, right? So the preteens and the teenager, they're starting to form their little personalities, right? Demi, she wants to be a lawyer, right? Malik, he's our family comedian, right? He just wants to be famous, right? And Leighton is our engineer. He's our future engineer. So that's the kid. He loves to tinker, loves to build stuff, right? He's our Lego master. So,
did you feel that you got married and came into a family at the right time in your life?
Oh yeah, perfect timing, perfect timing. So, as far as like No regrets. Best decision ever made, right?
What are your wishes and aspirations for young people that sit and listen to this this history that you've offered to us, the story you've shared? What advice do you give them?
I tell them this. If you don't hear nothing else I say, understand this. I don't care who it is that says it, right? What the relationship is to you, right? If somebody tell you you can't do something, let it go in this ear and right out the other, because I was that kid. There were plenty of people that told me, can't do it, not for you, can't, no, not, nada, right? If you got the drive and desire and it's here, you can do it. Trust me, there are people that will help you. There are people that will back you, right? There are people that they'll go, what, this kid is serious, right? If you don't hear nothing I say, just know there ain't no such thing as can't. If somebody tell you can't do something, you just look at them and keep it moving. Ah, yeah, right. Yeah, whatever, right? Because remember, I didn't graduate. And so people were constantly saying, well, you didn't graduate. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't. You got to be smart to do that. I am smart.
What are the opportunities that 2021 has that you feel are really bright and set for young people? What's the next great thing?
I tell you what, when I came through the pipeline, right, there was a path that you followed if you did it the civilian way. You flight instructed. You flew Part 135, which meant you did crazy things at night. Like you flew canceled checks around at night. Or like I did, I used to fly out of Salt Lake City, right? If I wasn't teaching, I would take developed pictures and test results to Colorado, right? To Grand Junction and Durango, Colorado. And then what I do when I drop off the pictures and the test results, I'd pick up urine and blood samples and undeveloped film, take it back. They develop it overnight, get the test results, I take it back. That's the kind of crazy stuff you had to do. Then you started at the commuters, you started here, you did this, you did that, you did this, in order. Now these kids have the opportunity, right? They have these programs where you can get in this program, right? And you can graduate high school and get your associate's degree at the same time, right? And then get hired, go to flight school, right? And they got these 18-month programs where you can graduate high school, and in 18 months, right, you can be flying one of them 70-seat jets out of Gainesville in 18 months after you graduated high school, because you got in that program and you graduated high school and you got your associate's degree on the same day. So now while you're working on your bachelor's degree, you're flying a jet, you're building your hours. This kind of stuff is out there for these kids. Just got to take advantage of it. Just got to go out there and get it.
Definitely. I didn't ask where you were born and your day of birth, your birthday.
December 1st, 1963, I was born in Montclair, New Jersey.
Okay, and do you know were you born in a particular hospital? Or where?
Mountainside. Mountainside Hospital.
And that hospital's still there?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Captain David Bridges, I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed our chat. I can think of probably 1,000 other things, but we've kind of reached a point where maybe it's good to just take a breath and think about it. I want to thank you so much for the interview, and by way of closing with that thanks, to offer you a chance for any final privilege. If there's a statement or observations that you want to make, no matter how long, if you make them at this time, and when you conclude, that'll conclude our interview.
You know what? It's always nice to tell the story because I want the young people to know that you don't have to be perfect to be successful, right? You don't have to be, and I mean, yeah, it's great to be a straight A student. It's great to get them good grades because now your options, at a younger age are better. But understand this, if you're not the straight A student or you're not the best academically, trust me, trust and believe, you can still be successful. You got to play catch up like I did, right? But you know what? As long as you have faith in God and you believe that you can do something, you're going to do it. You're going to get caught up. You're going to be successful, right? And then you're going to be sitting here telling your story. right? Sharing your story, how, somebody told you what I told you. And the words that came out of my mouth motivated you somehow. And you were like, I can still hear the words. I can still hear Reverend White saying, there's no such thing as can't, right? It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Those were the two things that I always, no matter what. Reverend White said it, it was like, I remembered it, right? My father saying, don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do. He said, always remember when you go out there, when you do a job, you do it to the best of your ability, because what you do is a direct representation of me and your mother. Because people look at you and they look and they say, well, either his mother and his father were just useless, or they did a good job. And he said, I ain't gonna have no negative reports. So I remembered stuff like that, right? I remembered stuff like that. So you represent your whole family. So if you go out there and you act a nut, right? People aren't looking at you. They already know you a nut, right? They're looking at your mom and dad now. Like, wow, how messed up are they? So just remember, what you do impacts a whole lot of other people, whether you know it or not. So, and my mom, you never know where your next job is going to come from. You never know who your next boss is going to be. You never know. So be careful what you say to people, and be careful how you act and present yourself out in public, because you'll never know. Somebody's sizing you up for something, and you have no idea they're doing it.
Fiend.